The Grand Bazaar in Istanbul is one of the oldest and largest enclosed markets in the world, with 61 streets and over 4,000 shops covering 330,000 square feet, or about the area of 6 football fields. Between 250,000 and 400,000 people visit it daily. And this may make it first among the world's most visited tourist attractions, with about 91 million annual visitors. And for many of us, we're more likely to know the Grand Bazaar from the outside than the interior. In the 2012 movie Skyfall, you'll recall that James Bond rode a motorcycle across a massive roof, highlighting the bazaar's architecture and the bustling market it contained. And while my trip didn't resemble any of the hallmarks of a James Bond adventure, I did get to visit this massive, historic marketplace. One afternoon while in Istanbul, I approached its northern gates and found myself walking alongside a distinguished older gentleman who appeared to be headed in the same direction. We started talking, and he introduced himself and described the shop that he had owned for over 25 years in the bazaar. As we walked to his stall, we first discussed a city that we both love, Zurich, Switzerland. He traveled there regularly to visit family who had immigrated there from Turkey. After entering the bazaar, we navigated through several halls lined with shops and finally arrived at his store, where he graciously offered me a small cup of mint herbal tea, and I purchased a roll of pistachio pastries. Our conversations turned to the reasons why I was in the country and my interest in the dark paths of the world's history, science, and paranormal. And finally, I asked if he knew anything paranormal about the Grand Bazaar. He paused, his kind, weathered face tightening while he spoke the words, "There are some things we aren't meant to know." It was clear he didn't want to say more, and so we quickly returned to other topics, and eventually I took my leave of him and his shop. As I spent the better part of 2 hours strolling under the covered bazaar, I wondered, how could a place with 91 million annual visitors be haunted? There were simply too many people to make the building a reasonably haunted one. And perhaps that's true, and while there's much to know about the history of the bazaar, some of it that we'll cover today, there are things that are hidden by the centuries of this history of this massive facility. Events that perhaps we don't want to know, but as seekers of truth, we're compelled to walk under the ancient ceilings and look behind the antique walls of this extraordinary space. There are some things we want to know, even if we aren't meant to. This is the My Dark Path podcast. Hi, I'm MF Thomas, and as I sit here tonight writing this introduction, I'm looking out over the city of Istanbul that straddles the eastern tip of the European continent and the western tip of the Asian continent. Istanbul, a city of more than 2 millennia old, unfolds before me, glittering with modern towers and ancient mosques all lit in the night. And while my trip here involves research for an upcoming novel, I've outlined 7 episodes about Istanbul. And in My Dark Path style, they all cover stories from the city's history, scientific discoveries, serial killers, crime, UFOs, hauntings, and espionage. And while these 7 episodes won't all drop in sequence, I definitely will get them out by the end of 2023. And if you like a deep dive with a particular geographic focus, you'll definitely like our mini-series, The Secrets of the Soviets, which is only available on Patreon. There, you'll get stories about Soviet UFOs, paranormal research, serial killers, and more based on a trip I made there to Moscow in 2021. And you can find the link to My Dark Path Plus on Patreon in the show notes or on mydarkpath.com. Also, we're putting out new videos regularly on YouTube and experimenting with shorts as well. And just in case you think I only share positive comments here, well, here's a rather stern rebuke I got from a recent YouTube short, with the commenter saying, "Soy boy, without Werner von Braun, we'd all be speaking Russian now. I'm sure there's an ivory tower somewhere with a dunce seat for you." Well, Jim, I appreciate your comments, and I think we agree that we are both very blessed to live in a country that everyone wants to come to and allows everyone the opportunity to reach their potential, no matter where they came from. But whether we agree on everything or not, thank you for joining me and walking the dark paths of the world together. I'm so grateful for your support, and in particular, all of those subscribers on Patreon. And thanks for your patience as well, as I'm not publishing episodes as often as I'd like to right now. My work responsibilities have been unusually heavy over the last 6 months, and I've also been dedicating some free time to learning how to produce YouTube videos. But as I reclaim a bit of my time, I'll get back to the regular release schedule here on the podcast and on YouTube. So with all of that, let's get started with episode 54, Gold, Ghosts, and Istanbul's Grand Bazaar. Part 1. In preparing for my trip, I read the comprehensive book, Istanbul, City of Majesty at the Crossroads of the World. It was written by historian Thomas F. Madden. It's an excellent history, but also quite humbling. It's true that in every part of life, the moment we acquire some knowledge, we're shown that there is even more knowledge to gain. And so it will be impossible to adequately cover 2,400 years of history in just a few paragraphs, but we simply can't talk about the Grand Bazaar without some context. The area that would become Istanbul started as a Greek colony named Byzantium. It quickly flourished due to its strategic location along the Bosphorus Strait, which connected the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. In 330 AD, Byzantium was chosen by the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great as the new capital of the Roman Empire and was renamed Constantinople. And this marked the beginning of a new era for the city. Under the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople became a grand metropolis renowned for its opulence and architectural marvels. The city reached its zenith during the reign of Emperor Justinian I in the 6th century, with the construction of the iconic Hagia Sophia, a masterpiece of Byzantine architecture that still stands today. Constantinople remained the center of the Eastern Roman Empire until its fall to the Fourth Crusade in 1204. The Byzantines managed to recapture Constantinople in 1261, but their rule was short-lived. In 1453, the city faced its most transformative event when it was conquered by the Ottoman Empire under the leadership of Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror. Constantinople was renamed Istanbul and became the new capital of the Ottoman Empire, marking a significant shift in the city's cultural and political landscape. Under Ottoman rule, Istanbul experienced a period of remarkable growth and development. The Ottoman sultans expanded the city with grand mosques, palaces, and public buildings. The most famous of these structures is the Sultan Ahmed Mosque, popularly known as the Blue Mosque, and it was constructed in the early 17th century. And the population of Istanbul grew quickly after that conquest, increasing from about 30,000 in 1453 to at least 600,000 people by the year 1600. At that same time, London only had a population of about 200,000 people. Only Beijing, China, and Vijayanagara, India had more people. And along with that population growth came more trade and economic growth in the city of Istanbul. The construction of the future Grand Bazaar started in the winter of 1455, soon after the Ottomans had conquered Constantinople. Its construction was a part of a broader initiative to stimulate the economic prosperity of Istanbul. And the man who's credited with the bazaar's creation was Sultan Mehmed II. He was born on March 30th, 1432 in Edirne, a town about 150 miles northwest of Istanbul. Mehmed was the fourth son of the Ottoman Sultan Murad II and Huma Hatan, an enslaved girl in Murad's harem. His father's reign was initially challenged by internal insurrection, but the Sultan Murad II prevailed and played a crucial role in expanding the Ottoman Empire's trade and building infrastructure in its cities. Sultan Murad II sent his son Mehmed to the town of Amasya at the tender age of 2. Amasya is an area in northern Turkey close to the Black Sea and about 150 miles east of Istanbul. The city was administered by Murad II's brother, Aladdin Ali, the governor of the province. Now, educating Mehmed was not simple. He was as combative as he was intelligent, and he grew up to be a fierce military leader as well as an intellectual with interests in philosophy, art, and science. He was well educated in the Quran and Islam, as well as in Western ideas. He also spoke several languages: Persian, Arabic, Ancient Greek, and Italian. And in 1444, Sultan Murad abdicated his throne following his oldest son's death and more political turmoil. Murad made Mehmed the leader of the Ottoman Empire at the age of just 12. But 2 years later, prominent political and military leaders convinced Murad II to take the throne back to deal with crises on several fronts. There were increasing tensions in the European region and turmoil in parts of the conquered territories, as well as an increased threat of crusaders. So at age 14, Sultan Mehmed II left his throne voluntarily, giving it back to his father, but he felt completely humiliated. He moved to Mansia, a city near the Aegean Sea where he was married. His move away from political responsibilities gave him additional opportunities to gain knowledge in a wide range of subjects. His library reportedly was filled with books about religion, geometry, engineering, astronomy, arithmetic, archaeology, geography, and philosophy. But 2 years later, in 1448, Mehmed and his father fought together at the Battle of Kosovo, where he gained practical military experience. And then, 3 years later, upon his father's death, Mehmed gained the throne for the second time on February 18, 1451. His experiences filled his mind with the idea that he should capture Constantinople. His external foes and internal rivals were not concerned, though, about his plans. European nations and the Byzantine Empire, remembering his brief and weak former reign, didn't see him as a threat. And within the empire, his authority was not yet firmly established. Yet the idea of taking Istanbul never was far from this young sultan's mind. Now, the city of Istanbul was thought to be unconquerable. Many had tried to take it from the Byzantine Empire and failed. But according to historians, Mehmed built an army of between 100,000 and 200,000 soldiers. His strategy was to surround the Byzantine capital from both sea and land. Then, with his troops in place, Mehmed ordered an unprecedented maneuver, requiring his soldiers to carry warships over the countryside by rolling them on logs. And doing this, he moved many ships overland on modern Istanbul's European side, and thus surprised the enemy from two sides. They then attacked the city walls with a barrage of cannonballs, and in the final step of the 50-day military campaign, his army dug an underground tunnel and planted explosives under the wall. Their detonation, coupled with cannonball strikes, broke a portion of the wall, creating an opening for the Ottoman troops. And on May 29, 1453, the city fell, ending the Byzantine Empire's century-old rule. Mehmed was just 21 years old. Now, what came next was also unusual. Perhaps it was his broad education that caused him to reconsider the traditional treatment of a city lost to an enemy. Originally, Mehmed had planned to let his army sack the city for 3 days. Sacking a city was to unleash havoc upon the inhabitants, pillaging homes, businesses, and churches, seizing valuable goods such as gold, silver, and artwork and other treasures. And a sacking was also marked by indiscriminate violence, including murder, rape, and enslavement. But on the day of victory, Mehmed countermanded his order and minimized the destruction of the city. This act, whether it was generated by mercy or wisdom, started his effort to actively rebuild the city of Istanbul. And 50 years later, it was the largest city in Europe. Part 2. The Grand Bazaar finally reached its current scope by the beginning of the 17th century. As the Ottoman Empire reached across 3 continents and controlled virtually all the roads and communications between Asia and Europe, the bazaar became the hub of Mediterranean trade. According to several European travelers, the market was even unrivaled in Europe. Its goods were unparalleled in their abundance, variety, and quality. We know from these European visitors that the Grand Bazaar had a square layout with two main perpendicular roads crossing in the middle and a third road running outside along the perimeter. Around the year 1638, the Turkish traveler Evliya Çelebi provided an important historical description of the bazaar and its customs. Within the bazaar, there were 67 roads, and each road was named for a seller of a particular type of product. The bazaar also included several squares that were used for daily prayers. Additionally, there were 5 mosques and 7 fountains, and 18 gates controlled access to the market. They were opened each day in the morning and then closed in the evening at sundown. Visitors had access at that time to 3,000 shops within the bazaar, plus about 300 that surrounded the bazaar outside the gates. But its growth didn't come without problems. Fires hit the Grand Bazaar regularly. The first occurred in 1515 and a second major fire in 1548. Other fires burned the complex in 1588, 1618, and then fires continued to occur almost every 20 to 30 years until the particularly destructive fire of 1701 forced several parts of the complex to be completely rebuilt by 1730. The last major catastrophe to strike the bazaar happened in 1894 when a strong earthquake rocked Istanbul. The last major restoration was completed in 1980, and it included the elimination of all advertising posters around the market. Now, the structure of every hall provides essentially a series of bays created by stone columns. The sunlight in the bazaar comes from rectangular windows placed right under the roof, and due to the scarce illumination, the building has only been open during daylight hours. And while the risk of fires and limited trading hours might have been a serious downside, there was a benefit to concentrating trade into a single building. The bazaar provided the highest security against theft and uprising. The gates were always closed at night, and it was patrolled by guards who were hired by the merchants' guilds. Apparently, to access the complex during night hours, an imperial edict was required. The only time the bazaar was officially opened at night was in 1867 to host a feast to mark the return of Sultan Abdulaziz from Egypt. Reportedly, he crossed the illuminated market riding a horse to the accolades of the locals. The historian Leek Gullersoy summarized the bazaar in the following way, quote, "It had an uneventful life, being opened with prayers in the morning, daily prayers at certain times were performed, and the traders smoked their long pipes and held their beads. Craftsmen worked their hammers, pens, needles, and closed their stalls before sundown and set on their way home, each in a different direction. Foreign witnesses recorded with amazement that a lot of shops have remained open for long hours without their owners or even apprentice or anyone else responsible in it." End quote. So despite the bazaar's immense wealth and its seemingly casual security, over the centuries, theft was extremely rare. Gullersoy described the security of the bazaar as something like a gold case in an iron case. But human nature is human nature. And you'll recall, perhaps, Willie Sutton, the famous American bank robber who reportedly said that he robbed banks simply because that's where the money was. And the Grand Bazaar, with its incredible stock of goods and gold, would not be free of a major theft forever. Part 3. The gold theft of 1591 is one of the great crimes of Istanbul's Grand Bazaar. During my trip, I found a few references to it, but couldn't get any meaningful details until I purchased the book, The History of the Grand Bazaar. At first, I had a Turkish version, but converting it into English using Google Translate was incredibly slow, and finally found a used translated copy published in 1980. So let's flash back to the winter of 1591. The bazaar had started its morning routine, its old bones creaking through the same morning exercises that it had performed for a millennium and would continue to perform even through this present day. As the gates were opened and the shopkeepers started laying out their goods, a cry went up from store owners across the bazaar. many had discovered the unthinkable. Some of the safe deposit chests where coins were kept overnight had their seals broken and their contents stolen. And it wasn't just a few coins, but 30,000 were missing. Now, to comprehend the magnitude of this loss, I'd like to share a little bit about the gold coins that were in circulation in Istanbul in 1591. And while the records don't describe the specific coins that were stolen, they were most likely the altın gold coin. The altın was the main currency of the Ottoman Empire and came in several denominations, but the most common being the sultani. It's hard to compare the value of a sultani coin to modern currencies, but I found a few references stating that a single coin could rent a modest home for several months, buy a year's supply of food, or hire the services of skilled craftsmen. So, back-of-the-envelope math would put the value of this theft at an astounding $180 million in today's currency. So this was not just a small crime, and not that any theft is ever excusable. And we see today the cumulative effect of lawlessness as a tsunami of theft destroys cities in real time. But this was a single robbery of epic proportions. This number of coins also couldn't be taken out of the bazaar unnoticed, but the coins were in fact missing. Now, the average weight of a sultani was about 7.2 grams or a quarter of an ounce. 30,000 coins would have weighed 670 pounds, or the equivalent of 3 grown men. But it's the volume of coins that also seems to be unusually burdensome to have been stolen from the bazaar. Think of a stack of about 30,000 nickels for a rough idea, perhaps something you could fit into a modern refrigerator. Now, the unprecedented nature of the crime ripped through the city and the government. The Sultan created a commission consisting of Istanbul's Islamic judge, the commander-in-chief of the Janissaries, or the military, and the police superintendent. This group was responsible to spearhead the investigation. Now, their first action was to shut down the inner bazaar for 15 days. That, in and of itself, was unprecedented. Soldiers went stall by stall, searching every trader's inventory and space, all 3,000 of them. All the traders' belongings were counted and their books were reviewed, but nothing was found, and it did not appear that the thief was a shop owner. But with every passing day without a culprit, anxiety spread throughout the city. For every citizen of Istanbul, the robbery of the bazaar was akin to doomsday, and the crisis extended beyond the breakdown of law and order. The extraordinary loss of money started a credit crisis where everyone who was owed money wanted to collect on the debt for fear they wouldn't have access to the funds. For example, a water carrier started to collect all the money that he was owed for the water he had sold on credit. This behavior was unprecedented in a world where the security of the bazaar was unquestioned, but the robbery, still unpunished, broke the confidence of the people, and the whole city was in sorrow. And weeks into the fruitless search, the commission decided to change their methods and started to ratchet up the intensity of their interrogations, and that meant torture. Torture and capital punishment were so common in the Ottoman Empire that there was even a fountain of execution in Istanbul, where the chief executioner and his assistant could wash their hands after every beheading. Now, the Ottoman Empire's executioners were never considered to be particularly merciful. For example, in May of 1622, the teenage Sultan Osman II suffered an excruciating death by compression of the testicles at the hands of the executioner known as Pelvin the Oil Wrestler. And even as I reread that sentence for the 10th time, there's clearly a lot going on in 1500s and 1600s Istanbul. Now, despite a lot of other examples of torture and execution, I can't find the specific techniques that the commission used to interrogate subjects in the Grand Bazaar theft, but there were several common techniques used at the time. A common and simple technique was called the bastinado, where the suspect would be restrained but with their feet exposed. In other cases, a suspect's feet could be secured in the form of footstocks. Then the torturer would use a rod or whip to strike the soles of the suspect's feet repeatedly. This form of punishment is particularly painful due to the high concentration of nerve endings we have in the soles of our feet. And moreover, the skin on this part of the body can be less protected and conditioned for this type of impact compared to other parts of the body, and damage can lead to significant pain and impairment. This torture and interrogation technique was simple and effective. Also, cage confinement was common in the Ottoman Empire at this time, and this wasn't just for use with the common people. When a new sultan ascended to the throne, it was often used to consolidate power and prevent others from trying to take the throne. At the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, there's a suite of rooms where Ottoman rulers were kept in prison for years in these cages. But for common criminals, the cage would have been too small to stand up in or lie down in, and also they would have been kept outside to expose the suspect to public view. Now, it's likely that both of these were used to torture suspects into confessions, but whatever techniques were used, the commission found no clues about who the thieves might have been. Now, perhaps frustrated by the fruitless torture and ongoing investigations, the seasoned police superintendent began to observe several merchants and store owners. And during this quiet surveillance, he identified a peculiar behavior from a young man who was renting a room from a Persian shopkeeper. The Persian merchant was selling musk outside the gateway leading to the jewelry section of the bazaar. Now, something unknown to us today compelled the police superintendent to inspect the Persian shop. And in the basement, he first found several bags which presumably were used to store gold, but they were now empty. And then an even more thorough search revealed the missing gold beneath the floorboards. The young man had ingeniously hidden the loot by arranging the coins in flat layers and then covering them with matting under the floor, ensuring the massive coins stayed concealed. The young man admitted his crime and reportedly said, "Don't blame anyone. This musk seller Persian is not guilty. I'll have to suffer the punishment of my crime." Now, of course, everyone was infuriated with the boy, as his crime had revealed that the bazaar was not as secure as everyone had come to believe. The police superintendent reportedly planned to have the young man killed by torture. As this torture only had to result in death, the police superintendent had many more options available. Impaling was a very common method for execution at the time, especially for thieves. In this case, a long, sharp stake would be introduced into the anus, and then the condemned would be stood up, allowing gravity to slowly allow the stake to completely run through the body, exiting at the shoulder or neck. If major organs were avoided, a person could survive this for several days before dying. Now, perhaps because the thief knew that impalement or a similarly horrific death was expected, he asked a favor, requesting an easy death from the ruler. Because of the difficulty in sourcing the story, it's not clear who the leader was to whom the young man had appealed, but it's likely that it was the Sultan at the time, Murad III. No doubt the Sultan had wondered what the thief was like, as talk of the crime had been the most discussed single act of criminality in the city in years. Now, I can't imagine that the thief had any reason for optimism that his request would be honored. The Sultans and the Ottoman Empire were extremely bloodthirsty. Suleiman I, who reigned from 1520 to 1566, murdered two of his sons, and during a campaign in Hungary, massacred up to 200,000 people. And then when he besieged Vienna in 1529, he lit a huge bonfire in front of the city and burned local peasants alive by the hundreds. And then, returning to Istanbul, he enslaved scores of young women, bringing them to his harem. So it was in this environment of punishment that the young thief asked for mercy, and the Sultan himself responded with mercy. Why did he do this? Had he seen other officials stealing much more wealth from the state? Was he impressed by the audacity of the young thief? Now, the reasons for his incredible mercy are undocumented. We only know that he ordered death by ordinary hanging. The young man, the thief, was hung until dead. The money was given back to its owners, the bazaar reopened, and daily life in the city returned to normal. Part 4. Of course, this is an interesting story in and of itself, but I've been wrestling with three elements of the bazaar searching for something that could explain the story. First, how did the young man manage to steal a huge volume of coins and hide them for so long? And second, how did the police finally find the young man? And third, what explains the Sultan's mercy? And then, I wanted to share more about this supernatural reputation of the Grand Bazaar. Reportedly, the bazaar has secret portals that allow people to be immediately transported anywhere. Now, I've not shared this last element with you until now, and unfortunately I wasn't aware of the claim when I first met the kind shopkeeper who told me that some things are better left unknown. The rumor that the bazaar has portals to other places was quite broadly known among people in the city. But I'll leave this episode here with the Grand Bazaar still the most visited place on earth and its gold recovered, but with the reasons for the theft, the methods of the theft, and his merciful death still murky, still dark, and unclear. I have hypotheses that I'm exploring that I'll share in another episode that will include another well-documented haunted location in Istanbul, the Basilica Cistern. The cistern's origins trace back to the 6th century, and during this era, Byzantine Emperor Justinian found the necessity to establish a reservoir for storing fresh water, essential for his palace's needs. Historical records document that a staggering 7,000 slaves built this immense cistern, spanning an expansive area of nearly 100,000 square feet, about the equivalent of 2 football fields. The cistern boasts a water-holding capacity of 2.8 million cubic feet. Inside, a multitude of columns can be found. A significant proportion appear to have been repurposed from several edifices across the empire, and many of these columns exhibit intricate carvings and designs. Now, I have a hypothesis that I'm researching about the connection between these two spaces that I'll share more in an upcoming episode. Thank you for listening to My Dark Path. I'm MF Thomas, the creator and host, and I produce this show with our engineer and creative director, Dom Purdy. If you can, please subscribe to My Dark Path Plus on Patreon. Your $5 monthly subscription gives you access to exclusive episodes and supports the expansion of the show. I'm grateful to each of our Plus subscribers. But if you can't subscribe, please take a moment and give My Dark Path a positive rating wherever you're listening. This really helps the show, and we love to hear your feedback. Again, thanks for walking the dark paths of history, science, and the paranormal with me. Until next time, good night.